Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in our ValuesJam guest session series. And Rhoda, thank you so much for joining. And to start with, please, could you introduce yourself? Tell us about the great work that you do and your company.
Thank you, Alan, for having me on this podcast. I'm very curious where this will go today. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Rhoda Schnitzer, with this interesting German surname. A little bit about myself. I've been in HR for the last 12 to 14 years, and I now work with Lippert. Lippert is probably not so known here in Europe, but a big US company. We are into manufacturing. We would say a manufacturing company. We make components. So in Europe, we make components for rail, RVs, and the marine industry. So in the UK, we have the marine industry, where we are quite strong, and you'll find rail more in Italy, and RVs is Italy, Germany, and here in the Netherlands. So I'm Leadership and Culture Development Director for the Netherlands, UK, and Germany. So I have a colleague who does Italy and Tunisia, and I do the North, as I would say.
So I'm curious about leading culture in a manufacturing environment, because sometimes that can be more challenging than in a knowledge capital environment, for instance.
I don't know whether it's more challenging or it's easier, because people are the same everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think in an intellectual environment, you get into a lot of conversations about what is engagement, what is motivating people. Whereas I think in a manufacturing environment, it's a little easier. It's basically people. And people want to come to work, be engaged. And we as leaders need to care for our people. So I think a leader has a huge, huge influence on the people he leads. So how he leads them and the effect he has on their life, that's tremendous. The other thing about Lippert, we believe in being business as a force for good.
Yeah.
Which means if you care for your people, they will go back, be happier people, happier families, and the families will make happier communities. So it's this kind of circle, but we always start with ourselves. So it's lead self, lead team, and then lead business. And I love this work. I love this work because I think leaders have a tremendous influence on on the lives of the people. I personally have had 12 excellent leaders, very different. And I wouldn't be where I am today if it hadn't been for these 12 leaders.
Yeah. You've reminded me of a chef that used to work for me. So I used to be in the hospitality sector. And I remember advising him to remember that as a leader of his team in the kitchen, he was very privileged to have that role, but also it was a big responsibility. And I remember saying to him that when your guys go home in the evening, the mood that they're in when they get home is down to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely spot on. Spot on.
And so
I couldn't agree more.
Like you say, leadership is not just about getting the job done for Lippert. It's about having a positive influence on the lives of the people that you're working side by side with, right? Yeah. Okay. Well,
and I think that's really important. I don't know if you look at Lippert, our website, you'll see we have core values. And one of our core values is passionate about winning. And it means winning, not just in the business field, but also in the cultural field. And we put that together. It's the same level, business and culture. And Lippert, I think, is one of the very, very few companies that has leadership separate from HR. It's a standalone function. And that shows you how important it is for Lippert to have great leaders and the effect that leaders have.
Well, that's fascinating, because I was running a business where I needed somebody to head up the human resources function. And it really confused me, because human resources, as you know, consists partly of all of the stuff about helping people to realize their potential, but then partly about policy and procedure. And it was like a light bulb coming on that one person, it's really unrealistic to expect them to be good at both of those things that are so completely different. So we split the function, and we had the HR process and admin stuff looked after by a less senior person. And then the more senior person was the one looking after how do we get our people really inspired and realizing their potential. So that's taking me back too many years. So here's the ValuesJam card deck.
Okay.
What I'm going to do is tip out some of the cards. How many piles would you like me to make in front of me?
Let's say 4.
4 piles, okay.
I'm just saying a random number.
And now left to right, would you like pile 1, 2, 3, or 4?
Let's take left, pile 3.
3, okay. And now in this pile, there are just 4 cards. So number 1,
great.
2, 3, or 4?
Let's take 3.
Number 3. Okay.
I'm curious what I picked.
Well, could you just repeat the function that you work in?
Leadership and culture, learning. Oh wow.
So the first question, you might know something about this, Rhoda.
Or I might not.
So the first question is this: what does learning mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
Learning for me is growing. And that's something that we all need to do, grow constantly, no matter where we are. It's a learning process. The process never comes to an end. And I think it's only when I'm under the earth that I'll stop learning and growing. So for me, learning is growing. That would be my first, yeah.
And then what about the metaphor, or what images or sounds or feelings come to mind when you think about the word learning?
Fun.
Fun, okay.
Fun and getting out of your comfort zone, which can be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But exciting, fun, exciting, something new. Growing pains.
And what about a picture? What an image?
I would use the image that we use a lot within Lippert, the bamboo tree.
Okay.
And we talk about culture being like the bamboo tree. And the interesting thing about the bamboo tree is that when you plant a bamboo tree, the first 4 years, you don't see anything. You see nothing happening, nothing over the surface. But you keep watering it and you keep plowing the field. And the 5th year, it grows, and it grows really, really quickly. Why? Because the roots are being made. And the roots, you don't see that. So we at Lippert say culture, we are the roots. It takes time till you see a culture change. You keep thinking nothing's happening, nothing's happening. So when we talk about growing, I really think of this bamboo tree. All the work that you put in, you may not see it immediately. You may not see it in the 1st year, you may not see it in the 2nd year, but then suddenly it comes, and then there's a real fast growth. And everyone thinks, wow, that's growing fast, but you haven't seen the work that you've put in before.
Oh, do you know, I'd never heard that about the bamboo tree before, and I love that. And you've reminded me, I was running a 5-star hotel, and the reason I got the job was because it was in a mess. And so I got there, started to do what I do, and nothing much was happening different. And it took 18 months before we started to notice much change. But exactly like you say, what happened from that point was that we used to operate a balanced scorecard, and we were the only business to deliver 3 all green balanced scorecards for the next 3 years. We won the Hotel of the Year in the UK. Basically the most successful hotel in the company. But exactly like you say, it needed resilience, actually, to maintain the level of confidence that you were doing the right thing. Because people, and I don't know whether you relate to this, but with your bamboo tree, I'm sure you'd have some people, why are we doing this? Why are we continuing to invest? So how do you deal with that?
Patience, I always remind them about, it's like learning to ride a bicycle. You have to keep on, and one day you just float. You don't have your balancers there, you just float. And when you look at that, the effortless way people ride bicycles, you can imagine that they couldn't ride before. They fell a couple of times. And just reminding yourself about how long you take to learn something. be it a sport, be it a language. You
Yeah.
know, I'm trying to learn Dutch and struggling with it. I'm thinking, I'll never get there. I'll never get there. And then I think of other languages I've learned that just flow. Suddenly you have that day where it just flows.
Yeah.
It's a process. Everything is a process.
So I follow, I enjoy sport generally, but I particularly follow football, and you mentioning learning Dutch. So the team that I follow in the UK is Manchester United, and they have a Dutch manager. And you mentioned the word process. That is his big word, because what he says, whenever he's asked anything about whether they lost or they won, it's just the process, and he's just really clear about that and very Dutch about it as well.
That sounds good.
Now, just going back to a couple of the things that you mentioned in learning. So you said that it's fun, and then you quickly said it's out of your comfort zone. And I remember thinking, oh, that feels like something that doesn't go together. And then I think about my personal experience in this space. I like to learn, but I don't like to learn slowly. and so I very quickly get impatient if the learning is a bit of a slow process. So how do you help people be comfortable with being uncomfortable?
Just encouraging them, standing by on the side, and encouraging people to just hang on, and reminding them of things that they have done, difficult things, or asking them, think of something that was really difficult for you and what goes really easily today. Many people have children, so you always go back to look at your children. Do you think, what are they doing today that they weren't doing about a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago? Or even yourself, the things you do, to go back to one of those times in your life where you thought you're taking a step out of your comfort zone, you're doing something new. And then sometimes I go away from the word comfort zone, I just say something new. How long did it take you? How long did it take you to take that step? How long did it take you to master it, or to get somewhere where you thought you'd mastered it? And to just go back. And these positive thoughts of success, that triggers your endorphins. And then you get excited about it. And then you think, oh, you're right. That's it. I can do that.
Yeah. There's also
just hang on, just hang on,
Hang on and keep going.
Yeah.
And it's really strange that this card has come out as well, because just this morning I completed a learner profile. So it was an online tool which helps you understand how you learn in order that you can learn better. I'll send you the link so that you can have a look at it yourself. But it's people do learn in different ways, right? So it's no good treating everybody as though they learn in the same way.
Yeah. And the important thing is to find out, how do you learn?
Yeah.
I'm a very impatient learner, and I cannot learn in groups. I've learned that about myself.
Okay.
Yeah, I get really impatient. I need to go at my pace. And normally I'm pretty fast with most things, other than Dutch. I always come back to the Dutch because I'm really struggling with that. And it's good to know your own pace, and it's good to know yourself. And it always comes back to knowing yourself. Who are you? What triggers you? What kind of person you are? And at work, at Lippert, we use the PI. I don't know whether you've heard about that. So it's the predictive index to find out your personality.
Yeah.
And that helps a lot. So I encourage people to do that, to get to know yourself, to know who you are, and to learn what's best for you and what works best for someone else. And always work on your strengths, because that's something, even in leadership, working on your strengths will bring you so much further than working on your weaknesses.
Yeah, get somebody else to cover that, right?
Yeah, and it's so frustrating when you're working on your weaknesses, because you do get better, but you'll never be as good as.
Yeah.
Probably as you want yourself to be. But if you work on your strengths, wow, you can run and you can be exceptional.
Yeah. And when you were talking about pace just now, about learning. So when I was a kid, I used to think that people that could juggle were magicians or supernatural, you know. And then I don't know how old I was, maybe, I don't know, maybe 40 odd or something like that. I decided that I'd like to learn to juggle, and I rationalized that you should be able to learn because other people have done it. So for Christmas, I got a set of juggling balls. And
Okay.
the reason I mention this is because I remember the instructions. They were not about learning to juggle immediately. They were about learning how to throw one ball from one hand to the other in an arc. And that's all. And then throw it back. And so, and I managed, so by the end of Boxing Day, I could juggle a little bit by just practicing.
Wow.
Yeah. But the reason I mention it is because I think what they were really smart about was setting the expectation of the different stages.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, don't think about juggling to begin with, just think about throwing one ball from one hand to another. And then I think the next step was you had a ball in each hand and you had to throw them and catch, you know, when they had gone across each other. And then it introduced the third ball. So I remember not ever getting frustrated, just taking it gradually. And I think that's I've never thought about it until now, but you talking about pace, getting people to understand that they don't have to get to the end right away and slow down. So I don't know how you do that with your Dutch, though.
Okay, let's not go there. That's a thing in itself.
All right, let's take another question then. Let's all right, where have you noticed a lack of learning?
When you become too comfortable.
Okay. Can you think of a specific example, either of yourself or somebody that you've witnessed?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've tried to move all the time. So, you know, in a career or in your at work, always moving roles, because otherwise you get too comfortable in it. You think you know everything, you become proud. And I think that is the worst thing that can happen to you, and you don't grow. You stop growing, you start stagnating. And to keep that curiosity alive. So for example, this is the 5th country I'm living and working in.
Wow.
And every time it's a challenge. Every time I, you know, make that decision to move, I just think, oh gosh, why did you do that? Why did you do that? And but it's exciting. The more you do it, the more you learn about yourself. And I think you have to be ready for failure. Just have to be ready to fail and to say, okay, this didn't work out. That's okay. You're not a total failure if you fail at something. We always talk about fail forward, and you do learn a lot. And even if you learn, right, this role was not for me, but I tried it and I learned something about myself. You know, I don't know, if you put me in a role as an accountant or something, I would be terrible. I would be absolutely awful in that. Awful. Although I love numbers, but I would be awful. But I would learn something about myself. I would probably learn there, right, you love numbers, but this is not your role.
Yeah.
Or you're not the kind of person to do the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
So I love starting things, but I'm not somebody who would maintain something for you.
Yeah.
So if you put me into a role and said, right, here is the curriculum, you teach this to people for the next 20 years, I would be wrong. But there's somebody else who would be excellent in that.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely excellent, but not me. So it's this learning about yourself. And how do I know that about myself? Where I tried to do a role like that and I failed. Or I failed or I realized I'm bored.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not growing, I'm stagnating.
And there's a couple, you've mentioned the word failure, and I've got a real kind of downer on the word failure because it is so laden with emotion, and it's a bad word. You know, what is real failure anyway? And in whose view is it a failure? Because not everybody would agree. So if you were, let's say that you were put in this accounting role, then maybe a person that's been an accountant for 10 years would view you as a failure.
Total
but
failure.
somebody else would say that you did a pretty good job at it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's all about context. And I think failure is overly judgmental when we don't really know what we're judging against. And then the other thing you mentioned about new things, I think there's something about our tendency to be, like you say, comfortable with what we know. But actually, that means that potentially we're really limiting ourselves because what we know is a tiny percentage of what is.
Exactly.
So why not just go into the space that you don't know? And I've learned to trust myself a bit more over the last probably 5 years, where previously I might have tried to rationalize and arrived at a decision, oh no, don't go there because there are these risks. And now instead just say it seems like it might be interesting and fun and show more curiosity.
It's
So
also the voices in your head, because very often you still have voices in your head that tell you you're not good at something. And I think it's tackling those voices in your head and finding out for yourself, am I good at it or am I not good at it? There can be so many things that people tell you, you're not good at that.
Have you ever heard of a book called Taming Tigers by Jim Lawless?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so he talks about the voice in your head. Let me just take a couple of minutes to tell you the little story. So he says, I was in a bar and I saw this really beautiful girl in the bar, and I decided that I was going to go and talk to her and introduce myself. So I took the first step, and a voice in my head said, "Hey, where are you going?" And so I said, "I'm going to go and introduce myself to that lady over there." And the voice said, "Have you looked in the mirror?"
Uh-oh.
Do you really think she's going to be interested to talk to you?
Yeah.
And then he says, and so I had the discussion with the voice in my head, and I decided I was going to introduce myself. And then 30 seconds later, I found myself in the gents. So at the last minute, the voice had won. So he's a great author, and he talks about how you really just need to overcome those tigers in your head in order to do what you want to do. So in ValuesJam, there's actually an opportunity to create your own questions. So let me invite you to do this now about learning. So ask your own question about learning, beginning with who, what, where, when, why, or how.
So this is a question I ask you?
Ask us. So I can go first, or you can go first with the answer, but let's have the question.
Who inspired you to learn?
Are you okay? So I'm happy to go. Who inspired me to learn? I remember a maths teacher that inspired me to learn, and also an English teacher. So the two of them actually. So the maths teacher, why? I think I was quite good at maths, and he was very encouraging. I remember an example with the English teacher, though, where we were studying poetry and we were asked about the meaning of this poem that was in the book. Now, in the back of the book, there was an explanation of what the poem meant. And I remember not knowing by reading the poem. So I looked it up in the back, and then I put my hand up and said, some of this stuff. One of my colleagues said, he's just looked that up from the back of the book. And the English teacher said, well, at least he had the initiative to do that. And now we can discuss the point. And I just remember thinking, oh, thank you, because it would have been so easy for him to have dismissed what I'd said because it wasn't really from me. But what he did was encouraged my curiosity and my initiative instead. So I remember those two from my school years. What about you? Who inspired you to learn?
Oh, I think a lot of people. I wouldn't be able to, pinpoint it to one person, because there are different phases of my life where I've learned something, and different people who encouraged me to learn a lot of things. And just listening to you, I was thinking, do I have a teacher? Not really. I always had this initiative to learn myself. So learn and read. I loved reading as a child. So I think I didn't need a push, but I was thinking as an adult. I was always, there was something in my head that always told me I'm not sportive. You know, there are these voices in your head that you always have. And you have these ski lifts. I don't know whether, you know, the ski lifts that come by and you jump into the ski lift and then they go on. And somebody had told me you'll never get that. So I had this voice in my head, and I remember telling one of my leaders, and we were having an off-site meeting, and I told him, I said, you know, I'm terrified of that ski lift. Firstly, it's the trust that I had to tell him something like that.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, really? Okay. And then there we were at the ski lift, and all he did was just follow me. And the confidence and the quietness and calmness, and I knew he was a very good skier. So he'd obviously been on these ski lifts. So he said, just follow me and I'll tell you how to do, and one step at a time. He didn't tell me, oh, okay, right, the ski lift is coming there, and when it comes, you jump in, and this is what you do. He just said, okay, it's coming, one step forward. So step by step. And I loved it. And I think of him very often. He played a huge role in my life. And the way he led me into that ski lift, before I knew it, I was sitting there, it was all easy. And we were there, and he said, it was easy, wasn't it? But he didn't tell me before, it's so easy, anyone can do it, because that's the worst thing you probably hear when you have a fear.
Yeah.
He just took me step by step. And that is something I learned about learning. Take people step by step.
So that's a parallel with the juggling story, right? Because
Absolutely.
it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And so the other person that you've now reminded me of telling that story is my mum. So my mum brought me up on her own. But she took me to the library, which was about, I don't know, a 15-minute walk away, to get however many books you were allowed. I think it was 6. And then she used to ask the librarian to test me on the books when I took them back the following week. And at that stage, I loved reading. And now, for some reason, I don't read anymore. But you've just reminded me of that. So thank you. That's credit to my mum.
But I see a lot of books in the background. You said you don't read so much now.
Yeah, everybody has a bookcase, right?
I'm looking around me. I've got pictures around me. But I do have some books on my table. So yes, which I'm, planning to start reading at the moment.
So you said there are so many people, and I'm beginning to think about other people now that have encouraged me to learn. So if I was to ask you a question, if you could give somebody that has encouraged you or inspired you to learn to somebody else, who would you choose?
Let me understand the question again. So if somebody who had inspired me to learn?
Yeah, so of all the people that have inspired or encouraged you to learn, if you just were to pick one of those,
one person,
who would it be?
Definitely my first leader who believed in me. An amazing person. He works with Boeing. So I was in the aviation industry. I worked for some time. And I would definitely pick him because he picked up somebody in his team who had absolutely no confidence, and that was me. Absolutely, I'd been battered by bad leaders who had really put me down. And he was the first person, and the gentleness with which he did it. Firstly, he had a very good, he could judge people very well. Okay. So he picked something, he saw something in me, he fought for me, and he picked me up, and I would definitely choose him. But I would be unfair to the others because I've had some excellent leaders, really, but I think of him very often. And in fact, the other day, I was chatting with him on Facebook because we just missed each other. I was in Banff and he had been in Calgary just 2 or 3 weeks ago. And we missed each other. We haven't seen each other for a long time, but yes.
Okay.
And choose him.
So a follow-up question then, again, if I can ask you to just focus in on just one thing that you learned from him, what would that be?
To have confidence in myself.
Okay.
And to know that whatever talents I have, they can be used parallelly. So I have a master's degree in German literature, and I went into the world outside. And many people would say, what are you doing with a master's degree in German literature? And he said, You'll never, whatever you've learned, you will be able to put that into use. And that was something that nothing goes wasted.
Yeah.
I think that's what he taught me. Nothing goes wasted. Whatever you've learned.
And you know, you've just opened something up there, because in the traditional meaning of the word learning, it's about taking it in, learning it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas what you've just described is actually the value is in applying what you've learned. And it might not be, so if you've got a master's in German literature, what you've learned, you might be able to apply in a completely different way. So it's not actually the German literature that you know about.
No.
It's the skill that you've acquired that you're able to apply that is more important.
The language, I would say the language, because I speak German fluently. More than it's nearly like it's a second language for me, because I lived roughly 23 years in Germany. That was the biggest benefit of my master's in German literature. I speak the language.
Yeah.
And that's an advantage in Germany if you do speak the language.
So let's now go big. And how could more learning improve the world?
You open up, you open yourself up, you open your horizon to learn, to know different things. So let's just take learning about other people, learning about their situations, getting to know their situations. So I can judge somebody, or I might judge somebody without really knowing what they are going through, walking in their shoes, and learning helps me. So be it conversations where we sit with one another, have these open forums where we talk with one another. You learn something about them. And when you learn something about them, you're more understanding. And if you keep this learning going, and if I'd stopped learning years ago, I wouldn't know about all the new things that are happening today.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be open to things. I wouldn't be open to people, to their circumstances. Let's just talk about learning about diseases. I'll take Alzheimer. If I don't learn about it, I will never be able to empathize with somebody whose parent is going through something.
Yeah.
It's easy for me to empathize with someone without knowing anything about the disease. After some time, that person will say, you don't know anything about it. But if I learn about Alzheimer, I can empathize very differently with a friend who might be suffering, or cancer. I've the last 2 years, 3 of my very good friends have lost partners to cancer. To read about it. So I didn't know brain cancer, right? Exactly what happens exactly. And then I learned, personalities change. Had I not learned about that, I would probably not have understood them or been a good partner for them when they talked about having a partner that wasn't their partner anymore.
Yeah.
So learning opens you up. It makes you vulnerable. It helps you to empathize with people better. I just think it makes you a better person.
Yeah, I just want to ask you about you mentioned it makes you vulnerable, because one of the things I enjoy learning, and I particularly enjoy learning things about things that I didn't know anything about before. But then quite quickly, what follows that is a kind of a trepidation or a fear about the fact that I only know a little bit. I don't know a lot. And so my concern is that if I get into a conversation with somebody, they will know a lot more and I won't know very much. And so is what I've got to contribute important enough? So even in the news, if I'm reading about this group versus this group and their opinions and the history of where it came from, I end up feeling pretty inadequate, actually, because how can I understand this whole situation? So do you ever come across that, or ever thought about that at all?
Yes, just when you were talking about it, I thought you can see it 2 ways. You can say, I don't know anything about it, or it can make you even more open, because you feel humble when you look at something, you read about something, you think, I've never really thought about that. brings a certain humility with one to say, hey, I have no idea about things. It also makes you authentic. So if you go into a conversation as, oh, I've read all about it, I know everything about Alzheimer's, you can't tell me anything about it. Oh, I'll tell you exactly how you're feeling. You go in with an arrogance. Whereas when you realize there's so much out there, you go in with a humility. So I might have learned, or I might have read a lot about Alzheimer's, I might have read a lot about cancer, but yet if I go in with a humility and talk to a friend of mine whose partner is currently suffering, you go with an open mind because you don't know everything and every situation is different.
Yeah.
And the humility and authenticity, and if you talk about values, what is a value that's important for me is being authentic. And being authentic is also saying, I don't know everything.
Yeah.
And that opens you up to even more learning.
Yeah.
Because nobody wants to talk to you if you come across as I know everything very well. I'm the expert. And I don't think I'm an expert in anything, even learning. I was like, okay, right. What do I know about learning? We're talking about learning. What do I know about learning? Nothing.
especially in the time that we live today, where you can be an expert today, but that is overtaken tomorrow.
Exactly.
So things are just moving so fast. And also you talk about Alzheimer's and our understanding of the brain. We now know stuff that 5 years ago even we would have questioned and said, well, there's no proof for that. And yet now it's like, well, now there is proof. And this makes me, I have a big question mark over the term expert, actually, because who's to say you are an expert, and an expert today, tomorrow is not an expert anymore because of new things that have been discovered. So it's exactly like you were saying earlier, that if you think that you've finished your learning journey, then very quickly everybody will run past you that are still learning. Right?
Yeah. And if you go back and you think about the people whom you love to be with, there are definitely people who are curious, who are always open, and who go into every situation with an open mind. And that is something that I try to do, to go in and not to think, right, I know this. And that's where we come down to biases also. That's now the favorite topic of mine, the unconscious bias that we have. We go in thinking, right, this fits into this box.
Yeah.
And then suddenly something happens that doesn't fit into the box at all, just explodes the box. And you think, gosh. And then you catch yourself and you say, oh gosh, I have a bias there. And that's where learning also comes in. That's always be ready for something new. And life can surprise you, pleasantly and unpleasantly, but you always learn. Coming back to your word about fail, you said fail is a very negative word. And I'm sure you know the acronym FAIL, first attempt in learning.
Yeah.
So I love that. So I love to put fail under first attempt in learning, because you've learned something, you're richer for it. And then it comes back to the glass half full and half empty. And I always think you have the power over your thoughts. So if you think something is like that, then it's going to influence you. So if you have an open mind and you go out and say, right, and yes, I agree with you, nobody's an expert. I do not like that. If she's an expert in this, an expert in that, I would rather say, oh, she knows a lot about something. Let's chat with her or with him, or whatever.
And on your first attempt in learning, it's a bit of a cliche, but a baby who's learning to walk, if they never fell over, no?
Absolutely. Or even your bicycle, I don't know if you're biking or, I still remember my first attempts and thinking, I'll never get that. It looks so simple. Everybody else can do it. I can't do it. I'll never learn it. And today you just get onto a bicycle, or even driving a car. How much of it just go, you don't even think of it till you're sitting with someone who's learning to drive and they ask you questions and you think, I don't know, let me go back to, do I do it? What do I do? Because it's just become a habit for you.
Yeah.
You just switch off.
there's two things there. And the first time you mentioned riding a bike, I was smiling to myself, and I didn't actually mention it, but I never learned to ride a bike.
Okay, that's interesting.
And then we went on holiday. This is a number of years ago, and it was one of these holiday parks where you could get bicycles to ride around the park. And so I had a go, and I managed to get it going. But then everybody turned a corner, and I couldn't turn the corner, so I just carried on going straight. But and then more seriously, the other thing that you mentioned about, when you know how to do something, you've learned how to do something. I like the model about now I can't remember the 4 steps. You'll probably be able to remind me. So it's the conscious incompetence, no, unconscious incompetence to start with, where you just know nothing. And then conscious incompetence, where you know what you're supposed to do, but you still can't do it. Anyway, then the 4th step, the unconscious competence, where what you described there, where you don't actually know or remember what you did.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really dangerous, potentially, place to be. And I always like to remind people to just be conscious and be aware of what you're doing. Because if you went through those traffic lights or around that roundabout and you weren't really aware of what was around you, then, if you apply that metaphor to other situations, there's a potential risk there. And I think it's about flipping between conscious and unconscious, so that you're on top of your game. Okay. Now,
which is why I'll never drive in the UK. I'll never do that. I mean, I had my terror the first time I ever tried. Went straight to the roundabout, and you can guess what happened.
The wrong way.
So I always say, I'm never going. I'm in the UK a lot. I'm either picked up, somebody else drives. I don't dare drive in the UK.
Well, we just came back from Greece, so I was driving on the other side of the road, and usually it's okay now. I suppose it's because, again, it's practice, isn't it? And I think that's something else about learning is the value of practice. And you just reminded me of this story. It was about a table tennis coach from England. And he went to China because they used to be, and probably still are, regarded as the best in that sport. And what he immediately realized in the area of learning was a totally different approach. And what he described was, in this country, what happened was you were the table tennis player, and at the other end of the table, your coach would stand with a table tennis bat and hit the ball to you, and you would hit the ball back, and the coach would hit it back to you. In China, what happened was the coach would stand at one end of the table with a bucket full of balls and would hit them fast at you, and you would have to try and get them back. So, of course, you're actually getting like 100 times more practice in the same amount of time. And I just remember this piece where he was saying, it's obvious if you're getting that much more practice, and it's good practice, that you're going to perform at a higher level. So it's this question around how do you build in as much practice as you can to support, reinforce, and further the learning.
And practice is everything. I think that's something that we forget about. Practicing and staying, just keeping on. The discipline, and very often that's what's missing. I mean, I would say with my Dutch, going back to my Dutch learning, it's the discipline of sitting every day and taking those 10-15 minutes and just going through those words. And probably I don't have that discipline, or it's not the motivation. I would rather say the motivation is not that strong. There are other things, competing priorities, and it's probably going to come one day where I'm going to sit down and say, okay, I've had it. I've got to do this.
Sounds quite close.
But it is. I think the tricky thing is, when you know a lot of languages that are similar to the language you're trying to learn, your brain is just muddled up.
Right.
So okay. I like to put it down to age. And say, my brain is just too muddled up with all those languages, because I speak German and then speak a lot of Swedish, which is very similar. And that just confuses me with Dutch.
So it strikes me that you've got a lot of things in place that support you being able to learn Dutch.
Except for time, like I like to tell myself. The conflict of interest, when you have a little bit of time left over, what do you do with it? What do you do with it? And I think with me, at the end of the day, it's the motivation to go out in nature and just go out and fill up with nature. So if I do have some time left in the day, it's like, let's go out. I sit a lot in front of, the computer, sitting in meetings, sitting in trainings. So when I do get that time in the evening, I find it, I struggle to have those 10, 15 minutes to sit with the language and just take my dog and go out.
Well, that's
he's a good distraction.
Yeah. There's somebody I used to work with, and one of the things that she does, which I really admire her for, is that she says when she's at home, if the sun is shining, no matter what needs to be done in the house or what work needs to be done, she goes out for a walk, and that's it.
Yeah.
And she's really, really good at it. And so somebody else recently shared with me that, and let's use the example of your 15 minutes with Dutch. When you make that choice to spend 15 minutes learning your Dutch, you're actually foregoing 15 minutes of doing something else.
Absolutely.
And sometimes we don't actually take that into account when we're making those choices. So it sounds like you might be spending more time in nature and less time with Dutch.
Yeah, nature it always pulls me, and it's irrespective of what weather there is outside. Because I'm not a fan of warm weather. So I'd rather have it cool, and I'd rather have it rainy and be out.
Okay.
And when it's sunny. So if I lived in a country where there was a lot of sun, I might get further with my Dutch.
All right, Rhoda. So what we're going to do is draw this Values Jam to a close with a final question. And it is this: what are you encouraged to do differently about learning as a result of our conversation?
Be more mindful of what I want to learn and put priorities. Just chatting with you and talking about Dutch, I went back to myself and I thought, okay, what is your priority?
Yeah.
What is your priority? Is it really that higher priority? Because if it's not that higher priority for me, I should stop beating myself up that I'm not learning.
Exactly.
So to go back and reprioritize things. And the other thing, when we were talking, I really thought about go back to those voices in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that, we had a podcast yesterday at work talking about the imposter syndrome. And there was something that one of the people there said is go back to those voices in your head that keep you from learning something new. And just talking to you, I thought, okay, what is the next thing? Where am I going out of my comfort zone? What am I going to do?
Something?
No, I just thought about it, and I thought I need to sit down and ask myself, because, there are lots of things I would love to do, but really, and take steps. Be intentional about it. Not just say, okay, I want to do something, but be intentional and start with small steps.
Mm. Okay, so I've got 3. I'm going to send you 2 links. One is the Jim Lawless book. Mm-hmm. The other is the learning styles thing that I explained to you earlier. And then the final thing that's really struck me about this conversation is breaking your learning down into small steps so that it doesn't seem like an elephant that you've got to eat. And at the moment, with some other people, we're creating, it's called the 4th dimension, and it is what we think could be a new environment in which people can interact and engage and collaborate, which combines in-person, online, and virtual. And I don't know anything about that space. And so over the last couple of months, from time to time, I felt, am I able to contribute to this? But by breaking it down into small steps, I think I'm going to be able to deal with that better. So that's been really helpful for me from this conversation.
And celebrate successes. I think we get so bent on celebrating the big things, but celebrate small successes. Take the time to celebrate that.
Yeah, that's good advice, because we've actually got our first version of the virtual space, and we've showed it to a number of people, and they just most times people say, "Wow, that's amazing." So now we've just got to, what is the next step, and where is it going to go? And then actually another part of that which relates to our conversation is that we have made a conscious choice that we're not going to kind of create a very detailed plan of where we expect it to go. Our attitude is more, the whole point about fourth dimension is that it's a bit unknown. And so we're going to allow ourselves the freedom to just live with that and not be able to explain what our ambitions are in detail, just more intentional, and just see where it goes.
And you might learn something new.
Exactly that. That's right. And so thank you so much for choosing this card today. You're now a qualified values jammer.
Thank you. That is fun. I didn't think we'd pick on learning of all the things.
Right. Thanks for your time, Rhoda.
Thank you, Alan. You take care. Bye.
Bye.